Shortly after 20 minutes past 1 on Thursday, the 8th of July, 2021, Jacob Zuma's vehicle convoy swept through the gates of the Estcourt Correctional Center just off the N3 in KwaZulu-Natal and delivered the 79-year-old former head of state into the custody of the Department of Correctional Services to start his sentence of 15 months for contempt of court. It was the culmination of a legal process more than 2 years in the making and was rooted in his refusal to appear in front of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, a corrosive and destructive phenomenon of organized corruption in which he was the central enabler. Zuma's arrest and incarceration happened without bloodshed, without interference from the governing party, and despite every attempt by his legal team, however ill-advised and misplaced it might have been, to prevent it. South Africa as a country has again signaled it wants to be a country of law and statute, a country where process and procedure is respected. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but the Constitution still holds. Welcome to News 24's Editor's Table, where tonight we will discuss the remarkable events of the last 24 hours. My name is Pieter du Toit, Assistant Editor for In-Depth News, and tonight I'm joined by a really fantastic panel of colleagues and friends and journalists who some have been on this journey for a long while, and others who have been on the Zuma trail for a while shorter. But welcome Karen Morn, our senior legal specialist who's been covering all the legal travails since the very beginning, Karen. We've got Pule Lechwiti Jones, our reporter who was in the cold of the night yesterday up until 1 o'clock, Pule, in Estcourt and in Nkandla. And then we've got Arjan Basson, who is News 24's editor-in-chief. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's been a dramatic 24 hours. It's been, we saw scenes yesterday that I'm sure none of us a week or two ago would have banked on that we would see, or, you know, maybe we would have. Maybe I can start by just asking everyone your impression of yesterday and 24 hours, or a couple of hours after, not even 24 hours after the fact, how you feel and what you think of this. Pule, can I start with you in asking you, how cold was it in Nkandla last night?
Well, a very good evening, Peter. And, you know, it first started off as a quiet day, slowly unfolding. We thought that, you know, some of the Zuma supporters would be making their way through to the homestead of the former president, Jacob Zuma. But that only happened late in the evening. And, you know, we camped there till around 1, like you said. It was really getting chilly. But the aim was to actually get answers as to whether the former president would be, you know, escorted to the correctional facilities, which eventually did happen. But what we also witnessed again was attempts to try and, you know, sway the media in a different direction, where we saw some of the president's allies, such as the likes of Carl Niehaus, coming out to address the media, saying that they would oppose the arrest of the former president. However, we do know that this is the same very, you know, veteran who has been suspended from the ANC. And of course, this so-called military veterans wing that they are advocating for has been disbanded by the ANC as well. But they were saying that, you know, they will be in defiance, and they would actually maintain the fact that they are still part of the ANC, despite what the national leadership of the current ruling party had said. So it was quite a dramatic scene that had unfolded outside the homestead of the former president yesterday.
Pule, how cold was it?
Very cold. From around 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. rather to around 1, it was very cold. At some point in the afternoon, it was so hot, and I didn't take my jacket. I was of the view that everything would be fine, that everything would be better. But around 6 a.m., it was really getting chilly. But the adrenaline and the energy and the push to try and tell the story just kept us warm. Running around, chasing an ambulance that came to the entrance, then was chased back. Members of the MKMVA chasing us away. It was that actually kept us warm and abreast of what we were trying to achieve that evening.
And then staying out of the way of Edward Zuma's big stick.
Well, I think the clock is still unticking right now. Like you had said, this is one fella who actually, was blocking the media from coming in. At some point, they had like about 4 or 5 bakkies just stationed at the main entrance of the Nkandla homestead, saying that no one would come in. I remember just about at around 4 p.m. when we'd asked for an interview with them. He had just got off SABC, and we'd asked for an interview with them. Just as we're about to start, he'd actually said, okay, wait, where are you guys from? And we told him News 24. And I was like, I don't speak to News 24. And we're like, but you can't say that. You can't give SABC an interview and you decide not to speak to us. And he eventually did, but he was saying that he would just take 2 questions, and which we did ask. And the message was also quite clear that the former president would not be arrested, and that if he were to be arrested, they would cause chaos within the area.
Karen, Adrian, Karen, start with you. Have you had time to kind of internalize what happened yesterday? I mean, see the scenes that we did see, how it eventually played out. Both of you, and starting with Karen, have you internalized it? Have you come to a sort of understanding or realization what the significance of yesterday was, or do you think it'll take a little bit of time to settle in?
Well, there's been a few thoughts. I mean, having spoken to some of the people who were involved in the handing over exercise and were involved in seeing him at the prison, there's a marked difference between what Jacob Zuma was saying on Sunday, the rhetoric of his son, the rhetoric of his supporters, and what was actually happening inside that house. People saying that Jacob Zuma, appeared initially to not really believe what was happening to him, telling officials that he needed time to say goodbye to his children, and then that he needed time to pray. Apparently that prayer went on for quite a while. At some point realizing, possibly as his lawyers were frantically trying to get the Constitutional Court to consider a letter which was legally untenable, realizing that in fact he was actually going to go to prison. And some of the, having spoken to some of the correctional services people off record, they said when he arrived there, he appeared genuinely shocked. I mean, there's that great phrase, sound and fury signifying nothing. And in the end of the day, I think that, there was a huge amount of rhetoric about bloodshed. The device of Marikana, one of the greatest disgraces of our, if not the greatest disgrace of our democracy, 2012, being thrown around that, innocent people were going to be murdered by the police, quote unquote, if they chose to arrest Jacob Zuma. None of that coming to fruition. And ultimately, I think, in many respects, very positive that people like Minister Ronald Damula have come out the day after and said, this is the process, this is what's happened to him. Stepped outside, there's been no attempt at secrecy as to where he was going. They've been very upfront, and they've repeatedly stated that he will be treated as much as he can be, like every other prisoner. And I think that there's a kind of democratic resilience to what's happened that I don't think a lot of us were entirely sure existed. But if we can go through an exercise like this and come out the other side, sure, there are going to be processes in the coming days, but it does speak to the tenacity of rule of law. And I think that's an immensely positive thing.
But Karen, yesterday was a significant day, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't a normal run-of-the-mill day. I mean, it was a red letter day in our democratic history, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think, the fact that there wasn't a huge standoff, the fact that there were these promises of potential violence, but everything was done so procedurally, ultimately he was taken. No, correctional services had clearly considered where they were going to take him. There was a clear kind of sense of a plan that was unfolding. And there was obviously, you know, there were a few events that happened this week which were very unfortunate, not least of all the police minister writing that letter to the Constitutional Court suggesting that he would stall the orders of the Constitutional Court until Zuma's litigation was over. You know, he subsequently stated that, you know, would he not get a response from the court, that the orders would still be enforced. But I think what has been amazing is that people have become very palpably aware that you can't, you know, the process of justice is a very definitive process. And you can't, you know, use a sick note from your mother to get out of it. It has to be, things have to be done in a proper and procedural manner. And I think that's been one of the most emphatic kind of aspects of this. And I think it will be one of the key issues that gets debated in the coming days, was just how much Jacob Zuma is in prison as a consequence of really terrible legal advice.
We'll dig into that tonight. We've got 40 minutes, and if I can remind our viewers tonight, if you want to pose questions to the panelists, please post it in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to work through as many of them as we can. Adrian, I want to get your impressions first before I kick off tonight with the first official question, which will be to you. But what's your overall take, impression from yesterday? How significant a day was yesterday in our democracy's history, and in our recent history, where the rule of law has been under pressure, and where Zuma's taken up so much acreage of the media space, and I suppose as journalists, he's taken so much space up in our heads. How significant was yesterday for you?
And he's taken so many of our evenings. Pieter, it was a momentous day. There's no doubt that it was a historic and momentous day for democratic South Africa to jail one of its former presidents. This has never happened before in this country. It's the first time that a democratic president has been jailed. And in fact, unless I'm not, I can't remember now, I think it's the first time a president, even before democracy, has been imprisoned. And it is momentous. It shows, as Karen rightly said, it shows that the rule of law is working. It's sometimes ugly, it sometimes takes long, it sometimes is croaky, and it's slow, and it's frustrating, but it does work. And in the end, Jacob Zuma did hand himself over and was arrested before midnight. I'm very glad that it worked out the way it did. I was trying, I'm sure all of us were trying to play out in our minds, how is this going to happen? How is 100 police vehicles filled with very senior trained police officers, trained in riot policing and special forces, how are they going to go in there and take Jacob Zuma from that Nkandla household, whether he was sitting in his lounge or whether he was in the bunker? And I mean, we just had, I'm sure we all had this movie in our head of what was going to happen, and it wasn't going to be pretty. There was going to be collateral damage.
We prepared for it.
And we did. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday morning with Pule and Shante Schwartz, our colleague, our videographer on the ground. I mean, we had an editors meeting with them to say, remember, your life is never worth losing for a story. I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen. You know, on the weekend, there was talk of at least 100 people with firearms. It takes one person to start shooting at the police to cause a carnage. So I'm very, very glad, very happy that was avoided. Those Pule can tell us, but that convoy was very close to Nkandla. It was moving in on Nkandla last night. Right. It was almost around the corner. And I mean, you know, guys like Edward Zuma, who may or may not have been inebriated by that stage, would not have moved out of the way. So, you know, thank God we didn't see that. I think seeing Jacob Zuma admitted to prison, seeing him processed as a prisoner today, is good for the country. It is good to draw a line in the sand and say the law reigns supreme. The judiciary will no longer be intimidated. We are a country of democracy. We have a Bill of Human Rights, and we have the rule of law, and that counts in South Africa. To see Carl Nias this afternoon being arrested for blatantly breaking the lockdown regulations is good, because why do we have laws if some people can break them and others don't? So I think ultimately it's been as painful and historical as it's been. It's also been 2 good days. Frankly, I think we must now look forward and see what lies in the future.
Adrian, can you remember the very first story that you wrote about Jacob Zuma? I want to talk about the arc of the Jacob Zuma story. Can you remember where you first came into contact with Zuma, and when you first realized that Zuma might be a problematic figure?
Yeah. Well, my interaction with the Zuma story, or the Zuma chapter, started with the trial of Schabir Shaik that started in October 2004 in the Durban High Court. But obviously the preceding 3 years, or 2 years, in 2002, I think the first article was published by Sam Sol in the Mail and Guardian that mentioned Zuma as a suspect in the Scorpions' arms deal investigation. You will remember, Peter, that the now defunct Scorpions, the best anti-corruption unit we ever had, was seized with investigating the multi-billion rand arms deal. I think it came to about 70 billion in today's terms. And part of that arms deal was a Corvette, 4 Corvettes we bought from a French arms company called Thales. And this company had a BE partner, a local BE partner called Nkobi Holdings that belonged to Schabir Shaik. And in their investigation of that specific leg of the arms deal, they found something that we now refer to as the French fax, which was this famous document where Jacob Zuma, where basically a French Thales executive confirmed in writing that Zuma had agreed to receive a 500,000 rand bribe from this company to protect and promote them in South Africa. And I mean, that piece of documentation was central to that case, and will be central again, Karen, when the case resumes in about 2 weeks' time, if I'm not wrong, because that does implicate Zuma in that bribe. So that was really the first time that I heard of him. I subsequently covered the Shaik trial. I learned a lot about his time as an MEC in KwaZulu-Natal, and a number of the quid pro quo examples that the state will argue against Zuma of how he helped Shaik happened as MEC actually in KwaZulu-Natal, where he took Shaik to foreign investors. I remember there was a Professor John Lennon, not the rock star, who wanted to start a culinary training university in Durban, and Zuma literally told him to take Shaik as his BE partner. So there was a lot of that quid pro quo evidence late in that trial as well. And I just, at that point, realized that this is a kept politician. This is a politician who needs to be kept by someone with money, who literally cannot sustain his lifestyle, who cannot pay his basic bills for car valets and school fees and rent, and needed someone to sustain his income, and that gave me great cause for concern. And then, of course, Shaik was convicted, and in his judgment, the late Judge Hilary Squires referred to the corrupt relationship between Zuma and Shaik. And this was 2005, Peter, 2 years before the ANC still continued to elect him as party president, and the rest is history. So it was in the early 2000s, really, that I realized this person is problematic, and yeah.
Well, I'm going to come to you now, and I want you to think about this so long. I want you to think about the impact that this could have on the ANC, given that he's a former ANC president and a freedom fighter. But before I get to you, Karen, I was looking for a document today in one of my files, and I came across a printout of a story that you wrote for the Cape Times in, I think it's around 2008. It was about Zuma's tax issues at that stage. It was about regularizing tax affairs before he was about to ascend to the presidency after he became ANC leader in 2007. Same question to you. I mean, you've been in this game for a while. even though, you know, our viewers you might not look like it to our viewers tonight. You've got enormous institutional knowledge. When did you realize that Jacob Zuma is going to be a problematic figure? Could it have been when you wrote that story for the Cape Times in 2008, or was it a little bit earlier than that?
Well, I mean, I've been following Jacob Zuma's litigation since the rape trial, which I think Adrian also covered in around 2006. And obviously, he was acquitted in that matter. But a lot of the things that happened in that rape case were fundamentally disturbing in terms of how, you know, the accuser in that matter was eviscerated. Her entire personal history was brought out. Her family was subjected to huge levels of harassment. Their home was burnt down in Umlazi. She had to flee the country with her mother. She was in a safe house. And there were many people who made interventions to try and, you know, seek to get her to drop the case. And the same rhetoric that is, you know, we've become used to a thing of, you know, any kind of allegation that is brought against the former president is loaded with accusations that it's politically driven. But I knew Fezeka, and she was genuinely traumatized by what had happened to her. And she didn't deserve to be forced out of her home, to have people threaten her life, to have people literally mock trial, do mock illustrations of how they were going to stone her in the street outside the court case, to clamorous and rapturous applause from them, thousands and thousands of supporters. And what's been fascinating, and I think Adrian can support me in this, is that when Jacob Zuma went on trial for rape and when Jacob Zuma initially went on trial for corruption, he was a political force. It was unbelievable. You would go to the court in Johannesburg or to the court in Pietermaritzburg, and there would be thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. And Julius Malema would be, you know, making statements about Jacob Zuma's rape accuser. Bladen Simande, Zwelinzima Vavi, Fikile and Balula. It was like a who's who of who would ascend to the highest offices, you know, subsequent to that. And you really had a sense that this person, while shrouded with, you know, these allegations, was a serious political contender. And I remember having arguments with people who said, he's never going to be elected. He's never going to be ANC president. And I remember saying, yeah, but he is. He is. It's going to happen. Like, this is what is happening. It's an anti-Mbeki sentiment, but this man is going to be president. And then when the spy tapes incident occurred, and it was, you know, early April, and going to the NPA's offices, and actually at the time I'd been the person that broke the story that they were going to drop the case against Zuma. At that stage, I didn't know what the motivation was. I just knew that an email had been sent from the NPA to say that this was on the table, and then subsequent like interim meetings. And I remember having huge fights with Billy Downer because he was like, this is never going to happen. It can't be. And then it did. And sitting in that room, just being like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Because it was, you know, and I think that's the thing, is that it's not like this democracy hasn't been tested. It has. The NPA was destroyed by this for a very long time. It had no institutions were destroyed in a kind of, you know, almost reflexive protection of this man. And we are starting to recover from that. And, you know, in many respects, people will look at what's happening outside, decontextualized from everything that's come before, the attacks on everyone who has accused Zuma, the attacks on everyone who has tried him, the attacks on everyone who has sought answers from him, Zondo, you know, Madansela, etc. And they will say, you know, this is horrific. This is someone who you know, is being detained without trial. That language he uses, which is completely factually and legally untrue. But in the end of the day, that thing of, you know, that culture of victimization, that culture of attack was inherent even in the late 2000s. And I think that, having witnessed what happened to Fezeka, I remember just being immensely apprehensive about what the future path of this country might end up being.
No, Zuma was like you say, was a significant political force. And I remember sitting at a dinner ahead of the 2006 local government elections at the Sunnyside Park Hotel in Parktown in Johannesburg, in between Naledi Pandor and Toko Didiza, and both of them said Jacob Zuma will never become president because the ANC Women's League will never allow it. And I asked both of them, how can you be so sure? He seems to have enormous support. And less than a year later, he was victorious at Polokwane and he ruled our political scene for more than a decade after that. Both Adrian and Karen have now sketched the history of Zuma, someone who carried enormous clout at grassroots level, who was able to muster enormous support at grassroots level, but who also managed to garner the support of the broader ANC alliance. Karen mentions Zima Vavi, Leiden Zimane, members of the ANC of the governing alliance back then, who all rallied to Zuma's support, ensured that he swept to victory in 2007. He won the ANC's presidency twice. The ANC won 2 significant general election victories under his leadership in 2009 and 2014. How significant is this? And you're a political reporter, you deal with this every single day. You're in close contact with colorful characters like J.C. Duarte quite often. How significant is this for the African National Congress that their immediate past president tonight is locked up in a jail in KwaZulu-Natal?
Well, Peter, it's quite a significant idea and message of what has happened. But I'm just going to base this, on condition of what I've been doing in terms of communicating with members in the National Executive Committee, of course, have come out to tell us on the basis of remaining anonymous that, this for them is a celebration that finally, the big elephant in the room has been gotten rid of. And they see this also as a sort of, victorious a battle that has long been looming, especially with us seeing some of the support rallying towards the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, as well. You also remember that what this has done is that not only has it brought so much spotlight on the ANC itself, but it has also created so much. We also would have heard last week Sunday when was speaking to the supporters here in Nkandla, saying that they will receive their next message from the commander-in-chief, of course referring to the former president, to say they will then have a step forward as to what will be the next mandate. So you sort of see a parallel line that's been drawn within the party, showing how some of the members who have been siding with them for quite some time are still with them, but who are now siding with the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa. We've seen now in the Northern Cape as well, the premier calling that corruption should be eradicated in the party, and that no one is above the constitution of the party. And what we also now heard, Peter, to make this even much more clear, is members within the party now calling for the immediate expulsion of the former president's membership of the party, saying that he has now been convicted and he is incarcerated and that his membership should be terminated. And these are the kind of meetings that the party currently finds themselves in terms of being at loggerheads as to how they can deal with this current political situation they find themselves in. Yesterday, they released a statement saying that, they wish him well in prison, to go well. But you have seen the reaction coming from other opposition parties saying that they want the incarceration actually of the former president that has been for quite some time. And today as well, actually, this was quite surprisingly important when asked about how has this caused division within the governmental cabinet. The Minister of Department of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola, saying, look, there hasn't been any division that has been caused in cabinet. In fact, everyone is still well ahead of what's going on, and that everyone is still steadfast and well, assuring the nation that nothing has happened within cabinet. But behind closed walls, there are different messages of what's been going on. Some within the party welcoming this decision of the former president having to finally be incarcerated, saying it is actually a big political point for Cyril Ramaphosa, who we know as well. His campaign was also based on trying to clean government and eradicate corruption within the country.
You touched on a very important or very interesting question about possible suspension of Jacob Zuma's membership. I'm sure if Carl Niehaus can be suspended, someone that's gone to jail for contempt of the country's highest court should surely be a candidate. Have the ability to do some introspection. The fact that someone of Zuma's stature, the fact that someone of Zuma's stature that played such a significant role during the struggle, being imprisoned on Robben Island, playing one of the leading roles during the constitutional negotiations in the early 1990s, surely this must hurt the party. I mean, surely, when the ANC's leadership goes to sleep tonight, they surely must think, hell, this is hurting us. Do you think they've got the ability to recognize and realize that and do some introspection?
Well, look, in terms of doing a self-introspection, I think that's very important. The question should be, will they pull the trigger as yet? That's the most important question, yeah. We've also seen now in the province of KwaZulu-Natal with the Provincial Executive Committee, the likes of Sihle Zikalala and co, now having to write to the National Executive Committee, which is the highest level national leadership in the ANC, saying, can we support this guy when he goes to rallies? I mean, we've been with him for a very long time. Can we pledge our allegiance? And in that form, we've seen him also supporting him when he had appeared before the Tallis case in the Pietermaritzburg High Court, justifying it by saying, no, we had already written to the National Executive Committee before, and they're well aware of this, despite the party saying whoever goes there shouldn't go within party capacity. But these are the kind of, things that are slowly unfolding that we are seeing. And it's also quite, magnificent to see that tomorrow, when Ace Magashule has to actually hear whether he will be actually suspended or not before the Johannesburg High Court, this will also set a great precedent as to what should be the next step forward if it does not go in his favor. Because the only person that will be left now is, of course, the former president of the country, Jacob Zuma, to now know what happens with his membership, because he is currently incarcerated and he has been found guilty by the Constitutional Court, which sentenced him to 15 months in prison. So the party has to go back to the drawing board to try and see how they can resolve this issue, because trust me, if this has to happen to anyone else in the party, there will be that whole question of how the former president's membership has been suspended while their membership has been.
Well, maybe Ace Magashule is the new Jacob Zuma, Karen Moore. Adrian, this must hurt the ANC. I mean, a party with the pedigree of the ANC as the oldest liberation movement on the continent, it had the moral high, certainly had the moral high ground in the 1990s, must hurt them. A former president in jail tonight. Do they have the ability to do proper introspection?
Pieter, I think it depends on what you mean by hurt the ANC, because obviously people who were with Jacob Zuma in the trenches and in exile and, have memories of him as a freedom fighter will be saddened by what has happened to him and how he's turned out. I mean, I've spoken to many ANC politicians in the past who were shocked by how Zuma was, in their words, captured by the likes of the Guptas. And allowed himself to be captured. So I think from that human kind of historical level, there will of course be people who are hurt. The party will be hurt. The party will be damaged. Whether it will hurt them politically, where it matters at the polls later this year, if we have an election this year, I'm not so sure. I think it may work in their favor. I actually think a normal voting South African who either previously voted for the ANC and stopped voting for the ANC, or who has voted for another party, may look at this and say, oh, well, somehow President Ramaphosa has done the right thing, that our state is now able to arrest a former president and incarcerate him without major troubles. We've seen the arrest of state capture criminals or suspects And you know, this may feed into the very high ratings that that President Ramaphosa has been receiving. I mean, it's been interesting, Pieter. You would know that, you know, President Ramaphosa's ratings are much higher than that of the ANC. So it's almost as if voters see them as separate. And I think this could work in the ANC's favor, you know, specifically with the dire lack of proper opposition politics in South Africa at the moment. So it will damage the ANC from a historical perspective, but I'm not sure if it will be that damaging to them at the polls.
Karen, you're going to enjoy this. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. If I cast my mind back, which is, you know, sometimes difficult to do, but if I put in all the effort, I cast my mind back to 24, 48 hours ago, you know, we were in the midst of a thrall. The Constitutional Court issued its judgment last week. It said Jacob Zuma needs to hand himself over within 5 days. If he does not do so, the police have 3 further days to take him into custody. We saw an exchange of extraordinary letters, a letter written by the state attorney detailing advice given to the police, which was sent to the Constitutional Court. We had a letter from Zuma's lawyers at the very last moment yesterday, trying to persuade the Constitutional Court to see things according to Zuma's legal team's views. Give us your impression of the legal process after the Constitutional Court's judgment last week up until his incarceration last night. I know you're in contact with some of our top legal minds. You've been following this from the very beginning. You've read about every single letter and court document that has been put forward. You know it intimately. Give us your impression of the legal process. Did it work? Were things done according to protocol? Did the Constitutional Court err in hearing Zuma's rescission application this coming Monday? Because at one stage, Karen, everything was quite muddled, wasn't it?
Look, I mean, my understanding is that we shouldn't read too much into the fact that the court has agreed to hear this. I mean, I think you don't need a huge number of justices to agree that issues need to be ventilated or, you know, for a case to be heard. And I think, you know, there was a minority judgment. This was a case where it was probably the most vociferous discrepancy in stances that I've ever seen in a Constitutional Court ruling. Extraordinary situation where the minority judgment, Liana Tehran, writing with, you know, supported by Chris Jafta, essentially saying that the Constitutional Court is unconstitutional, that they should never have sentenced Jacob Zuma to direct imprisonment, that this matter should have rather been referred to the NPA in circumstances where a coercive mechanism of imprisonment, for instance, a suspended sentence, was not an option. And, you know, obviously that judgment has been utilized by, amongst other people, Zuma, to argue that he's being subjected to detention without trial, very loaded term in South Africa, redolent of the apartheid era state of emergency that was used to unconstitutionally and unlawfully, though we didn't have a constitution at that time, to imprison thousands of people indefinitely, so that the apartheid state could suppress uprisings by the majority Black population. So, you know, but Kampepe, what was so fantastic about that dissenting judgment is that it strengthened the Kampepe ruling, because Kampepe literally point by point by point dealt with all the arguments that Tehran raised. And there's a pivotal line in that ruling where she says basically that Jacob Zuma has no one but himself to blame, that he is been given the most extraordinary level of opportunity to involve himself, to come to the court and explain why he had walked out, why he had defied the commission, you know, and to explain his conduct, chose not to do so, was offered the, you know, opportunity to engage with the court on sanction, and thumbed his nose at it, wrote to the Chief Justice a long letter in which he says basically the judges of the court are akin to the apartheid government in their treatment of PAC leader Robert Sobukwe. So he's given all these opportunities and he rejects them. And now, extraordinarily enough, in the rescission application, he seeks to have an opportunity to present evidence about his state of health, his age, etc., in circumstances where the Constitutional Court literally extended him that opportunity and he thumbed his nose at it. In fact, the word that Kempepe used was squandered. Now, in the midst of such a damning judgment, if you are of the mind that, look, we want to reel this thing back, we want to put it on the table that this was all just a horrible mistake, the first thing you do, Pieter, is that you go to that court and you say, look, we're going to seek a rescission, or we're going to try and seek because the rescission thing is fatally flawed. But we're going to seek an order staying the execution of the arrest and detention, pending our case before you, the rescission case, which is extraordinary. It's the second of its kind in the history of the Concord. And we're going to do it before Sunday. So we don't, we make sure it's heard before Sunday. None of that happens. Instead, in a bizarre turn of events, which I think is going to be smacked out the park by one Judge Jerome Nguni tomorrow morning, they decided they're going to go to the Pietermaritzburg High Court to get the Pietermaritzburg High Court to interdict or suspend the execution of a constitutional court order, which is in the context of a very strongly worded ruling about rule of law and the misconduct of the former head of state. Now, Nguni, as anyone would have watched that hearing on Tuesday, was manifestly uncomfortable. He was not. And then when it becomes apparent to Dali Mpofu that he is going to lose on the point of jurisdiction, and he will, he then at the end of it starts embarking on this desperate rant about Marikana. And it's a manifest attempt to intimidate the judiciary. I mean, I was appalled by that. And then in the tragedy was that at some point in the rescission litigation, the inquiry literally said to Zuma's lawyers, this is not the appropriate court. The High Court's not the appropriate court. It can't interdict. Go to the Concord, seek your stay there. If you do so, we may revisit our stance, our opposition to your case. You're basically opening the door to them getting some form of stay of execution. They don't take it. Instead, 5-6 hours before this man is to be jailed, they write this bizarre, ill-written letter where they actually acknowledge that the High Court doesn't have a jurisdiction, and they ask the Constitutional Court to intervene after it has in fact closed for the day.
Okay.
And
Karen,
you can't get worse than that in terms of bad legal advice.
Pieter, I'd like to just ask Karen something, because this is something that fascinated me, which I think she knows and can share with our viewers and subscribers. So, Karen, it's clear from the arguments that Dali Mpofu has been making that they take a very dim view of the legal advice Jacob Zuma received from Musi Sikhakhane. Why don't they make that a much bigger issue? Because they're almost like suggesting it, but they're not saying to the court, he had, can I say shit here? He had shit legal advice. He shouldn't have followed it. Sikhakhane was wrong. We are sorry that we listened to him and we want to change that. I mean, or is that not something that advocates will do to each other? I mean, is there some kind of collegiality thing that going there, or is it, or is that not a defense on an appeal type of case? Can you not say my lawyer was wrong?
Well, there's a few tiers to this. First of all, Dali Mpofu and Musi Sikhakhane have had a long and collegial relationship over many years, and I think that that's a dynamic. Second of all, Jacob Zuma makes a kind of strange argument on that, because he says, you know what, I didn't walk out of the inquiry, I was actually going to get medication, where his lawyers were on record in front of him saying, we're going to excuse ourselves, best you accept that. And they were warned by Paul Pretorius, if you walk out this door without permission, it's going to be an offense under the Commissions Act. So he then says, well, I told my lawyers, I thought I was going to go back. It's a very strange set of submissions, which he then alters in the High Court. The other thing he says, which is pivotal to his line of defense, and I think may end up being the biggest issue, is he says, I thought that when I applied for Zondo's recusal, that was enough to stop me from being expected to appear before the state capture inquiry, regardless of a constitutional court order that I do so, which is manifestly rubbish. But then he says, I accept now that I should have got an interdict staying the subpoenas issued against me by the inquiry. However, I was not given advice to that effect. Essentially, my lawyers at the time, Sikakani, Eric Mabuza, etc., didn't advise me to do so. And interestingly enough, Prof. Masala from the inquiry is like, you can't blame your lawyers. And I'm gonna paraphrase here, but you're a grown-ass man and a grown-ass president. It wasn't like you appointed these people. It wasn't like you didn't. You've been in the courts long enough. We all know. Hashtag Stalingrad. You know what you're doing, so don't try and blame them. So, fascinatingly enough, the inquiry has now come to Sikakani's defense, though he's not named. Zuma never names him; he just says his previous lawyers. And it said, in any event, this is absolutely irrelevant to a rescission. And where he is also, there's this fascinating dynamic as well, because Jacob Zuma, in many respects, is in prison because of his public statements. So he makes these very bad legal decisions, but then he makes them 1,000 times more toxic, literally like throws poison down his own throat, by going out publicly and making statements like judges are corrupt, they're getting money from Cyril Ramaphosa, they are acting like apartheid judges. And that was the difficulty. So as much as he may have got made legal advice, which is going to be a dynamic come Monday, mark my words, he has also compounded those issues with his own conduct.
Guys, I want to get to the questions, and we've got a number of questions from our subscribers and participants that we need to get through. Adrian, on Tuesday night, you interviewed Bheki Cele, the Minister of Police, Karen, and that was after this letter was sent by the state law advisors to the Constitutional Court seeking direction. And that was another spanner in the works. We didn't know, was the police backtracking? Was there some pushback in the police to the imminent arrest of Jacob Zuma as per the Constitutional Court's instructions? In retrospect, Adrian, you were concerned about it, but after your interview with Bheki Cele, your mind was laid to rest, or was put at ease rather. In retrospect, Karen, was that letter fit, or was it a proper letter to the Constitutional Court? How do you see that letter in retrospect now? And do you think the police, as Bheki Cele told Adrian, thrown under the bus by the courts?
I fundamentally disagree with Adrian on this one. The court's ruling is completely unambiguous. There's no ambiguity there. And Tembeka Ngwaya Toby arguing very compellingly for the inquiry on Tuesday that he said that letter was quote unquote nonsensical. There was no need for clarity. You cannot just ignore. Imagine if that was the case and you said, look, I have these concerns about X, Y, Z. I, as the police minister who has not participated in this case, except to abide by it, I'm now going to decide that I'm going to delay the implementation without bringing a formal application for variation or extension. If he had done so, if he'd gone to the court and said, look, absolutely understand your concerns, that we must implement. However, these litigation issues have given me pause. May I apply for a variation of an extension of the order? I do not want to be in contempt. It is very likely that the court would have considered that. But he doesn't do that. He writes a letter. It has absolutely no legal effect. And then he puts the pressure on the Constitutional Court to state the obvious to him, which is you need to act on that order. And that becomes a whole other politically problematic thing, because then it's like, oh, look at the Constitutional Court, so enthusiastic to see Zuma jailed. No, there's a ruling in place. There are proper procedures. The police did not embark on them. And I think as a consequence of that, we saw Zuma's team following the same set of attempts to get a letter in to get the Constitutional Court to reconsider. The Constitutional Court does not work like that. And I am shocked to my very core that the state attorney would think what they did was in any way appropriate. And a number of legal commentators, I think, have worded this far better than I am. But that was the moment at which I started to become seriously worried about a potential deficit for rule of law, were the police to simply say, look, we're a bit apprehensive and we're not going to do this. That would have been beyond problematic.
Adrian, the floor is yours. You've got a little bit of a different view, especially after speaking to the Ministry of Police. But were you worried, given the letter, given the heat that letter generated, that the police could backtrack, were fearful of arresting Zuma, and that the police might defy the order of the Constitutional Court?
Look, legally, I mean, I cannot obviously fault what Karen has said, the fact that it was done in the wrong way and that there was more poor legal advice in this case. I mean, it seems like Moses Sikakane may not have been the only one with poor legal advice in this case. But I do not think, I mean, I think after listening to Kele explaining that the decision by the Constitutional Court to entertain the rescission application had changed things. I don't think that was an unreasonable question, at least to ask. Maybe they should have framed it differently, but I don't think it was unreasonable to ask, does that influence the order of last Tuesday? I think they could have done it better. But I mean, I must say, I think clearly was quickly afterwards realized and probably got different legal advice that he has to execute the court order, and that a court order stands unless put aside. And I mean, that point was made clearly. Look, I do have some level of sympathy for his views that the police was caught between different legal opinions, because on the one hand you also had the Pietermaritzburg High Court Judge Mnguni, who I think we all thought was going to give judgment there and then after the hearing. I'm confused about days now. Where are we? Was it on Tuesday? I think it was on Tuesday.
It was on Tuesday, yeah.
And then postponing to Friday, which is after the warrants expired. So it was almost, I don't even know, Karen, why he's going to give judgment tomorrow, because it's happened.
No, he wants to write a reportable judgment in which he puts everything on record. You could see the man was just lapping up all Tembeka and Baitobi's legal authority. But one point, Adrian, and then I'm going to shut my pie hole. The state attorney did not ask what the Constitutional Court what they should do. They told them, we will hold these orders in abeyance until this litigation is finalized. It wasn't a seeking clarity thing. And then they basically told them, and that was when the rubber hit the road. It wasn't like, let's seek a variation, It was literally, this is what we're going to do. If you want us to do something differently, give us directives. And that was where the wheels fell off the wagon, I'm afraid.
And then nothing happened. Karen,
because the Constitutional Court was not going to entertain that nonsense. No,
they weren't. Karen, Adrian, I want to get through as much questions from our subscribers.
Let's go. Let's do that
as possible. Adrian, I want to direct the very first question to you, and I'm going to quote it verbatim. It's by an anonymous attendee. You have a minute or less to answer this. I'm disappointed by the press, that is you, letting Zuma off the hook with all his lies. I know it's difficult, but why is not questioned closely and pressed when he lies so blatantly? This applies to so many other politicians as well. Adrian, 60 seconds.
This feels like a TV game. Look, anonymous attendee, thank you for your question. Look, we try and push politicians. It's not always possible. We don't always get interviews or press conferences. I mean, you would know that President Ramaphosa has given us very few chances to question him, but when we get the opportunity, we do. And I think what we have at News 24 is busy establishing, and what is so important in the kind of post-truth Donald Trump era, is that we do fact checks. We actually call politicians out in real time when they lie. So when former President Zuma gave his press briefing a few nights ago, I'm really lost on days this week, where Pule was Sunday, thank you. He's made a number of completely false statements, not even controversial statements, false. So he, when he says, I wasn't given a chance to argue in mitigation, that's a lie. And then we call that out, and we have to know why it's a lie, and we have to tell our readers. So, we will continue doing that. I think that's part of a journalist's duty today in this era. You can't just report anymore. You can't just straight report what a politician says. You have to give that context. I don't know if that was 60 seconds.
You breached 60 seconds, and might I add, Adrian's already written 2 books about Zuma where he did his best to call out Zuma's lies. You can go and get it. Pule, question from Anthony Rue, one of our subscribers, who asks, how many of the 15 months do you think Zuma will actually spend in jail, and what are the circumstances that will allow him to be released early?
All right. I'm just going to answer this based on what, the comment we received on authority today. I mean, Karen can come in and just also correct and help if she can. But what we are told is that, he'd had to actually go through if he had to apply for a parole, it would have to go through the parole executive board at the correctional services. If he meets the legal requirements, then he would actually be eligible for that parole. In terms of the timeline and number of months you'd have to serve, we're being told it's partially about 3 to 4 months before he can be exempted that parole. So that's according to the information we got from the ministers and of course officials from the DCS, Department of Correctional Services, who are on the ground with us today. And they were basically saying, look, just like any other inmate, he'd have to follow due process. He would not be given any preferential treatment whatsoever.
Pule is still in KwaZulu-Natal. He might be frozen. Karen and Arden, are you frozen?
I don't think so.
No, we're not. Apologies for Pule. He's still very close to Nkandla, where we do have issues with connectivity. Pule, you're still there?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Pule, I've got a second question for you, if you don't mind. You were there last night in the thick of things. You narrowly evaded being hit on the back of your head by Edward Zuma's stick. Do you know who got Zuma to change his mind and go to jail without being arrested?
Look, so this is one critical aspect of what had happened yesterday. And I was talking closely to some of those who are next to Zuma, including one of his daughters, actually, who were inside Nkandla yesterday, and some of his allies who were there. And this had been a conversation that had been going on since around 12 p.m. Or 12 in the afternoon. So you remember we broke a story that the Minister of Police was expected to arrive in Nkandla with a whole delegation, but that actually changed. Because then, conversation and planning actually reverted to family members now having to come in. And what it was crucial there was some of, that the advice that came from the elders of the family, and of course, the close friends who were inside there telling him that, they wouldn't want to expect any theatric entrance from the authorities, but to actually for him to comply, and there would be a way forward as to what can happen next. I remember calling around when the motorcade actually went in the first time, Adrian calling me to ask if I should find out if it has left already. And there was so much confusion happening on the ground. And at the time when we called, it was around 10:30 in the evening, and we were being told that they're still deadlocked in a conversation, and they're still trying to convince him to actually go ahead with what was happening. Remember, we were also told that, Ubaba, known as Jacob Zuma, is a very stubborn old man. He just doesn't want down his sword. So
Yes,
it takes a lot of convincing. And of course, his family members now have to come into play, and, to try and avoid any commotion that would happen in front of that gate and inside, they actually had to now, at about, what we were told at about 11:30, that's where actually they were coming to an agreement and reaching an agreement. And I remember making a call after that as well to one source who actually we dropped in the group crying, saying, look, he wasn't happy with the decision, but the decision that was taken had to be taken.
That's a fascinating answer. Karen, I'm going to the last question to Karen. And Karen, this is impossible because I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and 30 seconds in your life is, it's just not, possible to answer questions in 30 seconds. But Chris Matthews asks in 30 seconds, thoughts on the Zuma Foundation's argument that Zondo's application to the Constitutional Court as court of first instance was either unjust or unconstitutional?
Well, the contempt application was brought in court because of the timeline was happening. Well, I mean, the initial application to compel, that's where the debate lies, right? And he said, look, we were running out of time. We wanted this man to testify. We brought an application to compel him. The contempt case that they brought against him was naturally going to be in the Constitutional Court because the Constitutional Court was the court that did the ruling. And I think the urgency of the matter unfolded as a result of Jacob Zuma's particularly vociferous attacks against the court and the judiciary, who were accused of corruption and being, operating as the apartheid state had done. So, there was a time frame for the commission. There was a very firm-based set of facts for the inquiry to pursue the litigation that it did. And ultimately, Jacob Zuma, it wasn't like he was given many opportunities to participate. And the tragedy of this entire situation was Jacob Zuma would not be where he was if he'd simply gone to the inquiry in July 2019, sat down and answered questions. None of this would have happened. And as Sissy Kampepe said, and I'll say it again, he has no one to blame for himself where he is. To try and now kind of create this alternative divergent universe where Jacob Zuma, had he been given, had he been in a high court or an appeal court, things would have been different. No, it would have just taken far longer to get where we are, but the similar outcome may have emanated because the level of contempt that he showed was so problematic, so dangerous, and so utterly destructive to our democracy.
Last word to you, Adrian Basson, the editor-in-chief of News 24. How does this week rank in your career as far as significant moments is concerned?
It's a big one, Pieter, and I mean we are in the middle of a global pandemic, so in a way it was a nice diversion from COVID-19, which we are covering on an almost daily basis. But it's a historic moment. It's a pivotal one, and the jury is still out on whether the country and the ANC and all of us have learned anything from the Jacob Zuma years and how that will play out going forward.
Thank you very much, Adrian Basson, News 24's editor-in-chief. Karen Moore, thank you for your insights. You've got a big day tomorrow again, your 407th big day in a row. Pule Letwiti Jones, drive back safely tomorrow, and thank you very much for your hard work yesterday. And thank you very much to all our subscribers who joined us tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And